Hi there, and welcome back to the Energy Sector Heroes podcast. My name is Michelle Fraser, and every week I will speak with incredible people who share their lessons, experiences, and stories from their time spent in the energy sector. Hi there, and welcome back again to this week's episode. If you're new to the show, please take a second to subscribe and even consider sharing the show with just one other person. This week I am joined by Henry Morris. Henry is a carbon capture and storage expert. Henry, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, yes, as Michelle said, I'm involved in carbon capture. I've been working on carbon capture about 5 years. And prior to that, I worked in the energy or the oil and gas industry, working predominantly sort of for 10 years for a service company, Icon Science, and then sort of setting up exploration companies, exploring for oil and gas sort of in UK waters. Nice to meet you all.
Yeah, that's excellent. So I just wondered as well, how did you get started off in the energy sector?
Ooh, the energy sector. I suppose as a kid, I grew up on a farm. I loved sort of the earth, nature, geography, did geology as a sort of sideline, sort of half an A level. And then, I suppose just I like the idea of travel. I loved the earth. So kind of went into geoscience at Cardiff University. And then I suppose I actually almost wanted to be an environmental geoscientist at one stage, but I couldn't find any jobs and there wasn't much of a career path. So I suppose the oil and gas at the time was generating energy. Basically, an energy was a requirement to sort of create fertilizers. Fertilizers creates food and bring people out of starvation, famine. So it was, in my mind, a good thing and a good positive thing working in the oil and gas sector, and I still believe it is. So yeah, kind of just follow that natural route from sort of the earth sciences into sort of oil and gas and energy.
So you're working in carbon capture just now. What made you change?
What made me change? I suppose in about 2019, 2020, there was starting to become a bit of a movement towards, global warming was starting to become a bigger issue. It'd always been around, we're earth scientists, geoscientists, and we could see what was happening, but it was starting to be accepted by society around the world. And in reality, I suppose we wanted to play our part in sort of correcting it, utilize the tool sets that we had, sort of learned and taken on board from the oil and gas, and how could we play our part? So I think we had a bit of a transition. 2020 oil price, or 1920 oil price collapsed. And then we kind of had a little bit of a look around, a team of us, about sort of 4 or 5, and looking at things like solar, wind, how can geoscience get involved in, how could we sort of create a business in around sort of decarbonizing sort of the planet in essence. And sort of CCS basically was the one that came to the head. And we just identified some stores, some projects which we thought actually, they've been missed in the UK and actually would have a huge impact in decarbonising sort of not only the UK, but also continental Europe. So our stores that we kind of found basically are targeting sort of decarbonising London and the southeast of England, but also continental Europe.
Okay, so that sounds amazing. So, did you find it easier to transition from the oil industry to the renewables?
Yeah, I think, people are always scared of taking those leaps and jumps, but I think the more you take them through life or the earlier you take them, the better. And actually those steps aren't that difficult. You can do it slowly, migrating if you work within a bigger company, but sometimes if you work for smaller independent companies, you've got to kind of almost take those risks or do that extra bit of work on the side before taking the full transition from a E&P or oil and gas company to something like carbon capture and storage.
What is for a younger audience? What is the theory behind the carbon capture storage?
The theory is obviously at the moment there are, anything that creates energy for us, like waste to energy plants, power plants, which generate sort of electricity from gas. They are at this moment sort of kicking out sort of CO2 emissions into the sky. Steel factories, steel plants, cement factories, they all emit quite a lot of CO2 and they require a lot of heat and power. And those CO2 emissions at the moment are just going up into the sky. So, in reality, rather than adding to the CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere, we need to kind of capture those CO2 concentrations and store that CO2 back under the ground somewhere safe and secure. So that's where we kind of basically, in essence, are sticking not vacuums, but there's capture plants which capture the CO2 from those industrial areas, and then basically we pipe it offshore, and then we bury the CO2 sort of offshore in some old gas fields in the southern North Sea. So basically repurposing and reusing sort of old gas fields.
But that is going to be good for the environment, though.
Yeah, and that's my main aim in reality. Exactly. Our project will, when at full capacity, be storing around 40 million tons of CO2 per year. The UK emits at this moment around 400 million tons per year. So, we'll be cutting. Okay, there's wind and solar and renewables and nuclear, which will play its part in sort of reducing the carbon emissions. But equally, there's about sort of 20% of the UK CO2 emissions which require basically high energy havoc create emissions, and they require that CO2 to be captured and stored. So it just plays its part in the sort of decarbonisation or reaching the net zero targets that the UK has set for 2050.
Okay, so what type of skills and experience would a young professional graduate need to position themselves to work in the carbon capture renewable energy sector?
I suppose there's multiple entry routes in. It could be engineering. My route was geology and geoscience. So geology, geophysics, engineering, sort of they all create natural paths into sort of renewables or carbon capture. We look and study the earth and looking for structures. We look at wells. So it's the classic oil and gas sort of analytical review of the earth. Look and then kind of doing an analysis in terms of how the store will perform. So the techniques and the evaluation process is very similar. There's some very different risks which we have to understand. Rather than sort of extracting it, we are injecting it and storing it. So there's potential for leaks. But a lot of the same sort of geoscience sort of evaluation approaches or engineering sort of solutions are similar. People say there's big differences, but in reality, I would say there's subtle differences which we must understand and are very important to understand. But as humans, that's kind of what we do. We identify a problem and we find solutions.
Yeah, but is it always easy to find a solution?
Not always easy, but through sort of humanity, through time, we've always sort of we identify problems and we look for solutions. It's not easy, no, but that's where you mix great people together. And the beauty of the energy industry, or the oil and gas industry, we've come up with some sort of incredible solutions to finding hydrocarbons, or in this case, sort of, utilizing sort of old gas fields or aquifer stores to potentially to inject CO2 back into the ground. So it's the same sort of technology, the same equipment, and just basically just reused and repurposed in a slightly different way.
Okay, so if you were going to interview a graduate, a young professional, what kind of skills would you be looking for in an interview?
I suppose similar to sort of an energy sort of job, an understanding geology, sort of geophysics, or engineering sort of based background, a passion for the earth, good at sort of problem solving, but equally quite clear in their sort of presentations. I think kind of one thing which is, people are getting better at now sort of through generations, sort of more than sort of looking back, is, to sort of simplify a problem and present it clearly, but equally when challenged, be able to go into the detail. So, presentation skills are massively important because whether you're got a technical problem, you've always got to present a solution and simplify it to people which probably don't understand it quite as much as yourself when you study something. So presentation skills are key, but yeah, solid grounding sort of in some form of earth science or engineering is fundamental as well.
But it's the first time I've heard of that answer actually, that you have to be passionate about the earth. And yeah, everybody should be like that, actually. And I think everybody is like that. But in an interviewing setting, that's quite an unusual thing to say.
I suppose with the people that I work with, yeah, it's not a must. And you can, if you work within a bigger organization, you have individuals which can fit in individual pockets or little sort of areas of sort of work. But when you work for a small company, it's very much you want everyone to have the same kind of company sort of ethos. Why are you doing this? It's not just because I've got to earn some money to pay for my job. You've got to be thinking, what's the big picture? So equally, when you're a small company, you have to go out there and talk to people which are sort of possibly at a more senior, mature level of their career. So you've got to be thinking about the big picture, even though you might be doing something very small sort of on your day job, and it might be sort of doing some well interpretations or doing some seismic interpretation or, reviewing some documents. You've got to understand kind of why am I doing all of this? Where does it build to? What are the pros and cons? And equally nowadays in society, we are challenged about why and what we do. So I think everyone, if I was when I'm interviewing someone, I want them to be conscious of kind of what they're doing, not just a yes person all the time. It's what I want. It's good to have challenges come back.
Okay, so you also mentioned about presentation skills. Everybody hates them, including myself, actually, even though I gave one recently. But what is the skill to delivering a successful one?
Keep the stories simple. Yeah, keep it simple. I think you quite often get caught going down sort of rabbit holes and into too much detail. I think if you keep the story simple, then people get it. Think about sort of headline sort of messages, one key point per slide, simple graphics so people can get. You've got to remember when you build a presentation, you go in deep, don't you, and try and get a lot of information on there. But when you sat back in the audience, you're kind of listening to what the person's saying. You're using your eyes to kind of see the images, and then you kind of almost just remember one or two points per slide. So you've got to be very clear in getting those key points across.
Yeah, I totally agree with that as well, actually. So you've obviously had a very successful career up until now and will in the future. Where do you see yourself going in your career?
Oh, that's a tough question. Um, just want to keep on enjoying sort of working with people I like in reality. I still dabble in the sort of oil and gas industry. I work with Finder Energy, sort of a great Australian company. I consult back to them. That takes up a little bit of my time, but carbon capture is, the key thing, which sort of I'm driving with a bunch of friends in reality. Where we go in the future, potentially look and like to expand on that. We've got a number of stores that we're sort of developing with our partners Perenco and Harbour Energy and Summit or Seal. We will look for more stores. We'll see if we can help assist build out the industry, sort of storing more CO2, sort of decarbonizing the UK and sort of continental Europe. We've looked and we continue to look at projects around the world. That's the beauty about sort of geoscience. It isn't just limited to sort of the North Sea. You can look for projects where you can decarbonize countries such as India, Indonesia, South America, or the US. Where else can we copy and paste our template and do something similar elsewhere around the world? But it depends on the market as well, and also sort of geopolitics. Big things change at the macro level, which are kind of out of our hands. So you just always got to be sort of keeping an eye on, where the markets are moving, where politics is changing, and just adapt as things evolve.
Yeah, but so it is quite hard for people to change and adapt, and even just keeping an eye on the industry. Is it obvious to a business owner what the market needs? How do you keep one step ahead?
How do you keep one step ahead? I suppose you just got to, you always the markets don't change quickly. Things, evolve. You hear little sort of flash bites of news. You kind of look at where things are changing within society. As we've seen, sort of between the oil and gas industry change to an energy industry. Sort of transition, renewables, carbon capture. It's been talked about. All of the greening technologies and sort of decarbonization sort of approaches have been around for 20, 30 years and have been talked about, but they rear their head, and then sort of the politics change and it disappears. So CCS was around and sort of, was a thing that grew and became sort of something in the UK in around 2010, 11, 12. It was, but then it was dropped. So, hopefully this time it's here to stay. It seems like it is. that reform sort of conservatives, might have a different opinion to Labour. There's the big sweeping statements being made. Yeah, you've got to hope, you've got to put your head down and get on with your day job, which we all do. But at the same time, you've got to just be aware that things might change and adapt, be ready to adapt if need be. But also you've got the same tool set. Say if there is a big drive back to oil and gas in the UK, or a requirement for us to produce our own sort of UK sort of resource or supplies of hydrocarbons rather than importing it from somewhere elsewhere in Europe or Norway, you know, the market will swing. You've still got the same tool sets and skills, and you can sort of go exploring or sort of looking at sort of opportunities to tie back to existing infrastructure and sort of work more in the E&P sector. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question, but
I
it's
think it did. I think it did, and it was very insightful, actually. So, what is the most challenging part of your current job?
the most challenging. The most challenging, I suppose, we're a small company, so we look for we look for opportunities, and we stay got to stay, and we upsell and promote them. In reality, we bring in sort of the rest of the team. You've got to convince your team that you like something. This is a good opportunity. This is a good store. This is why I like it. And then you kind of almost upsell it again. So there's a lot of presentations behind kind of a technical work, well, in front of the technical work that you've done. So you're always being very positive and sort of upselling, promoting, which is like any piece of technical work that you do, whether you're at university or in the early stages of your career. You're presenting, you're upselling, you're marketing, whether it's up to different levels of management. I think the hardest part is just stepping back, and you've got to look at it and be quite, just accept challenge and make sure you are acknowledging all the risks involved rather than getting caught up in your own sales process, because life is about sort of promotions. It seems you've got to step back and go, it's risk. Whether you're working sort of in oil and gas or CCS, there is inherent risk. So you've just got to be aware of that and account and present the risk in its right sort of form and level.
Okay, so what was going to ask you? So, have you had any mentors during your career?
Yeah, well, I've worked around a lot of great people. Yeah, I think sort of, I've been very lucky with some of the people and the companies that I've worked for. I generally like small companies. I'm not really a big company person. I like starting small and building them up. Icon Science is a small little company that I worked for straight out of university. One of my university professors, Tony Evans, worked for Shell, invested in Icon Science, and he sort of found me the graduate job within a sort of Icon Science. There was 6 of us in the early days. And, there was great people like Martin Millward Hargreaves and Peter Doland, industry experts and legends, which basically helped, guided me, gave me a lot of personal time as well as sort of technical, and sort of commercial time as well. Those people in the early days are massively important. But then you kind of look out into the industry, and there's a huge wealth of inspiring people. There's a number of professors, equally, which are steering and driving sort of industries forward as well, but kind of being independent advisors to the government as well. And those kind of people like John Underhill, are massively important as well. And inspiring.
Yeah, I do understand that and appreciate that. So, how does your current role compare to your aspirations as a young boy?
Um, I think it fits quite well. I've been very lucky because, as I said, going through small companies and then building small companies to big companies, by doing that, and then sort of the companies selling, made some sort of decent cash sort of through those sales of those companies. It's been quite good. Now I think, I'm very lucky. I work from home sort of probably half of my time. So the rest of the time I commute to London, sort of work sort of within the London office. I think I've got a good balance. And COVID played quite a good part in that. I think COVID made a lot of people work, a lot more people work from home, realize that they could work from home. Doing interviews over Teams or meetings over Teams is really actually quite efficient. You can spend a lot of time talking, whether it be on Teams or sort of actually when going to physical meetings. But when you're doing physical meetings, you might have 1 or 2 meetings a day, whereas Teams, you can just have lots of interaction very quickly. I think, I suppose looking forward, I suppose I want to get more involved with universities, career development. I think I've benefited from sort of support from individuals sort of stepping out of university and those university people investing in new startup companies. And I think I probably want to play a part in that going forward as well, whether that's, yeah, universities that I went to as a child or universities near me here on the Isle of Wight, Southampton, Portsmouth. Again, they run some great courses, but again, to try and facilitate people making that step, making sure we don't lose graduates to just the tech industry. I think the skill sets that you get from sort of geoscience based subjects is incredible, and that, there is a requirement for more and more of those individuals in reality, because the world is heavily populated and we have limited resources. Those resources need managing, and they need managing efficiently and correctly, whether it's oil and gas, even whether it's CO2, or sort of resources, sort of, minerals, sort of in the mining industry. These are all things which we need to manage efficiently, extract it fine, but make sure, we get the balance right. So as a geoscientist, we're actually probably the best people to understand that balance of, we can't continue extracting things without, it's not an endless supply of any of these sort of natural resources out there.
Okay, so that's excellent. So I think that answered my questions. I was going to ask you, have you ever had any career disasters and how have you handled them?
Career disasters? I don't think disasters. I think not everything works out. I think I've joined one or two companies which I've stepped in to try and help. One sort of US sort of exploration company, and that stepped into the UK, stepped in to try and help sort of, I don't want to sort of probably mention a name, but I've got to help rebuild, work it from the inside and improve it. And sometimes it wasn't quite as easy as what it was, sort of macro level geopolitics and the oil price at the time plays a big part. There's only so much you can do by being a good, constructive, positive person. Sometimes when the oil price crashes, companies have to make cuts, so it doesn't matter where I was probably at that time, things were going to be hard. You're going to have to let people go and make difficult decisions and then rebuild. I think that's, it's life, but also it's the beauty of the energy business and any kind of business in reality, the highs and the lows. It keeps it exciting. If you want a boring, steady job, maybe the energy industry sort of or renewables isn't for you. But I think the beauty about the energy industry is that it gives you the highs and the lows, and you've got to ride those highs and lows and kind of enjoy it, not panic when the oil price or energy price crashes. Just look, changes positive, irrespective of whether you've made that decision to make a change yourself or whether it's been forced upon you. So yeah, I think it's
It is really difficult actually, and I think a lot of people are feeling the rise of, well, the ride of the low just now. How do you actually deal with that? Because a lot of people would find it quite hard, especially as a graduate coming out, trying
I
to look
think you
for this
deal
job.
with it. You kind of, once you get going, you have potential to earn a sort of reasonable money in the oil and gas industry or the energy industry, or as a geoscientist or as an engineer. The good thing is, I think you hopefully it's money, finance is a resource. So don't flaunt it all when you get some money. Save it, save away for the hard times, because hard times will come about. So be a little bit conservative in your spending, which is hard to do. We all like to have fun. We all like to party. We all get sort of drawn in to be buying sort of things that we see on Instagram, Facebook, or wherever sort of they're posted nowadays. But just be a little bit conservative in your spending. So yeah, I don't know. That's naturally quite tight and conservative, but I do live a very fun life. But yeah, just hold back for those hard times, because they will happen. There's this almost 7-year cycle within the energy industry. People talk about, whether it's 7, 10, 5, what does it matter? But you have your build-ups, you have your highs, and then things crash. So just be prepared for those highs and lows.
Do you think that the 7-year cycle actually exists?
I don't know. I think if you look at the oil price, there's definitely cycles there. It kind of builds and then comes crashing down. Whether it's 7 years, I don't know. I think cycles are a natural thing. You just got to look at the Earth cycles, being a geoscience. Is global warming an issue? Yes, it is. But there is the Milankovitch cycles, which, the Earth has naturally warmed up and cooled down in a number of different sort of cycles due to other physical forces imposed on it. Yeah, evolution, sort of biology, sort of, if you're a biologist, even there's cycles, isn't there? The old sort of rabbit population and foxes. There's cycles. So yes, I do think it exists. There's only so much control humans have.
Okay. I could have asked you a ton of questions after that. I'm going to ask you, what is your advice for any young graduates coming into the energy sector?
I suppose build up a diverse sort of skill set. Come in, be technical, have something which you specialize at and you're good at. Whether that's a geoscience topic or an area of interest, or more from an engineering sort of background. But equally, yeah, as I said before, kind of its presentation skills. It is difficult to get a job. There's definitely less jobs around. Technology is becoming a more and more important thing. And obviously there's people within the industry that basically will hold on to their jobs, which might feel that it's difficult for new, younger graduates to come in and step into. Older people don't have the technical expertise in around some of the new technologies coming through. AI, coding, these are all kind of nice little skill sets which you can build up in around your core sort of subjects, I suppose. And seeing how those sort of technologies fit in around sort of some of the more generic sort of subjects such as geoscience and engineering. How can you add something more to that subject? Yeah. Those type of things are quite important.
I do agree with that. So I was going to ask you maybe one final question. If you could turn back time, would you change anything?
Probably not. I think probably not. I think I've been very lucky. I've loved working sort of in the energy sector, the oil and gas sector. Met great people, traveled sort of the world a number of times. Technically, always involved in interesting jobs, but also you get involved in big business. The numbers, it costs or to develop projects out are huge. And equally, yeah, it's always pretty exciting crossing technical with business. And you meet lots of sort of diverse, interesting people from around the world, which is something I love.
Okay. So that's all the questions I have today. I would like to thank Henry for your time. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening and see you next week. That brings us to the end of another episode. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, I'd like to gently encourage you to leave a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts and share the show with another person. You can also follow me on LinkedIn or via my website, www.michellefraserconsultancy.com. Thanks again for listening and see you next week.